anyone who follows the FTSE 100 will be aware of Intertek, but can you tell me a bit about your work in the offshore wind sector?
Sure, happy to. Well, just by way of quick set the scene. So Intertek is a total quality assurance company. So we provide a broad range of assurance, testing, inspection, certification services right across all markets, but in particularly in the energy space, not only conventional oil and gas, but which is why we're here, offshore wind, of course. So what do we do in offshore wind? We work for developers, EPC contractors, asset managers, utilities, lenders, governments from time to time, and we provide them specialist expertise, assurance on their projects. That starts very early on, so when a developer, for example, wants to bid for a new lease, he needs to understand which site to pitch for, so he needs to characterize the site, he needs to obtain consent for the site, he needs to connect that site to the onshore grid through seabed power cables, and those are all areas that my business line comes in very early on. If you then move through the project a bit, once it's consented, once it's characterized, once it's engineered, we oversee the construction phase. So we have a very strong technical inspector capability in the business that pretty much inspects the whole supply chain that feeds into that offshore wind farm project, therefore assuring the project on behalf of the developer. And then all the way at the end of the project cycle, which we'll maybe come to in a bit more detail later on, we support the operation and maintenance phase in the most cost-effective way, deploying new technologies, etc. So that gives you a sort of overview. So we work for many parties in the sector, all the way through the project cycle, and the common theme here is really to help the client manage risk and assure the efficiency of the project.
That's great, thank you. And speaking of risk, Richard, coming to you now, offshore wind in Europe is obviously more mature and a developed market than other markets such as the United States. I'm thinking of offshore wind in particular. Challenges do you see in these markets?
It's a really interesting facet of the industry at the moment that we are talking about offshore wind as an industry. There's a lot of discussion here in the last day or two about the industrialisation of offshore wind. So no longer a pet project, no longer a kind of thing that we feel we have to do, but actually an integral part of UK industry, and therefore gives UK business and those companies who've been involved in the business over the last 10 years a real springboard to take that experience and that expertise abroad. So when we're talking about the less mature markets in Japan or America, then actually we have, as British industry, an awful lot to take to those markets. So really excited that Intertek's part of that.
Absolutely. And so one of your core competencies traditionally has been inspection. So what kind of trends are you seeing in that space at the moment?
A lot of what, as we've talked about, a lot of the focus in the last 10 years or so, certainly for the UK, has been about getting these projects up and running. It's been about construction, it's about getting offshore, it's about all of the things that Frank talked about in his introduction. We've got a lot more of that to do. I mean, if you've been sitting in some of the presentations and some of the conference sessions here today, the ambition going forward is for an awful lot more of that. But actually we now have an installed asset base, which is, if I'm correct in taking some of the numbers that I heard this morning, something like 80% of the global offshore wind capacity actually is currently in the UK. That's a capacity that is now not new, that is now very heavily into an operational and approaching the end of its guarantee phase. So assuring the integrity and the ongoing effectiveness of that equipment and of that infrastructure is now becoming a very big part of what the industry is concerned about and what Intertek is very happy to provide.
Absolutely. And on that note, Frank, what's next?
Okay, what's next? I think Richard alluded to it. We're at the start of an industrialization of the sector. It's going to grow many fold, not only in the UK and overseas. So we need to do that in a cost-effective way, bringing along all the stakeholders. So as the seabed gets more populated, not only with offshore wind farms, but also other users, we need to make sure we do that in an environmentally responsible way. We manage the risks correctly, bring society with us as part of the decarbonisation. And then, as Richard said, from a strong UK base, export all this capability to other countries and support their local supply chain and give them a helping hand in that through all our inspection capabilities using the very latest technologies that Intertek brings to the table there, the automation of inspection, the risk-based inspection, robotic techniques. All that sort of good stuff lies in prospect as we build on an exciting starting point as we sit here.
Thank you very much.